She buried my pregnant wife alive, and now she's telling me to trim the lavender. Darla Vexley, president of the Maple Rook Glen HOA, stood with one hand on her hip and the other tapping her stupid clipboard, like we were discussing lawn maintenance. "You're obstructing the runoff corridor," she said, cool as glass. "Per Article 12F of our seasonal landscaping guidelines, all unapproved flower beds must be removed within 48 hours. I was kneeling in the center of the earth cradle, hands coated in soil, heat rising from the ground like breath. It wasn't sunlight, it was residual warmth, still active, still fresh. "And I assume you have a certified permit for this excavation?" she added, lips curling slightly. "Or are you just feeling emotional again, Mr. Corrin?" I looked up, slow and steady. "That ground's still pinging heat signatures to my server," I said. "You touched something you shouldn't have. Subscribe now if you believe people like her don't deserve silence." What she did next? It's already being used as a case study in 2 states. My name is Silas Corrin. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a YouTuber. I spent 15 years with the FBI as a behavioral evidence specialist. I tracked traffickers, serial disposals, and disappearance vectors. I moved here because my wife, Raina, was finally past the 2nd trimester. After 3 miscarriages, we were told this baby might actually make it. The plan was simple: peace, privacy, healing. So I built her a flower bed shaped like a cradle, soft curves, shaded corners, white blooms to reflect morning light. She called it the spot the baby kicks the most. She said she could feel its heartbeat in the ground. It was her therapy, her sanctuary. And then Darla started coming. The first citation was about improper root depth, then soil encroachment into public utility boundaries, then a warning about unauthorized topographic modification. Every letter had that same crisp font. Every visit was followed by 1 more inch of ground mysteriously cleared. 3 days ago, Raina went out to water the lavender. She never came back. Her shoes were at the edge of the steps. Her phone, unlocked, was found upside down in the grass. I called Officer Bree Thalen. She filed the report. Darla said Raina was seen leaving the property by one of the groundskeepers. No cameras, no proof. Except, I don't rely on Ring. The solar lights lining the earth cradle aren't just decorative. I built them myself. Embedded passive thermal and motion tracking tied to a remote server I kept out of state. The data refreshes every 30 seconds. Raina's last motion was logged at 7:46 p.m. 2 minutes later, a heat anomaly remained. Same size, same temperature. It hadn't moved since. And this morning, Darla came back with a smile and an ultimatum. "You're emotionally compromised," she said. "Your wife made choices. Some people don't belong in this neighborhood." I clenched my fists, still buried in dirt. "You don't have the authority to touch that soil." "I have board consensus," she snapped. "It's already scheduled for removal. We're installing a rain garden." She had the gall to say it while standing 10 feet above my wife's warm trail. I stood up slowly, dusting off my palms. "I don't think you realize who you're standing on," I said. Darla faltered, just a fraction. Behind her, Lenward Pike stood near the tool shed. HOA issued vest, faded cap, clipboard tucked against his chest like a shield. He was watching us, but not intervening. I saw it then, in the shift of his jaw. He knew. This wasn't a missing person case. This was containment. This was burial. Raina hadn't left. She'd been silenced, 6 inches below lavender and fabricated ordinances. I took one slow breath. The wind shifted through the flower bed, soft and steady, like lungs drawing air through petals. And I realized something else. Darla hadn't broken a rule. She'd buried a witness. Darla's Lexus had barely pulled away from the curb when I stood, brushing the last of the soil off my knees. The ground still radiated warmth beneath me, not fading, not moving, just waiting. My hands were trembling, but not from panic, from clarity. She had buried my wife alive, not metaphorically, not emotionally, physically, below this precise patch of lavender and lies. The earth cradle had always been Raina's place. She said she could feel the baby flutter there, called it her silent chapel. I built it for her because I didn't know how to pray, but I knew how to protect. And now it was the only place in the yard where the ground felt alive without moving. I walked back inside the house and locked the patio door behind me. Every room was too still, Her book was still open on the arm of the couch, the bookmark halfway slipped between pages. The chamomile tea had gone cold in the mug by the sink. She'd only planned to be outside 10 minutes. 12 hours had passed. I powered up the terminal connected to my remote rig. The thermal lantern system had been logging data all night, just like it was designed to. Built originally for border surveillance tasking, I'd retrofitted the code to work on suburban voltage. Each light captured low-resolution thermal bleed every 30 seconds, stored off-site, and cross-checked for consistency drift. I'd never planned to use it in my own backyard. The heat signature hadn't shifted. 98.3 degrees, static. A human body cooling in open air would have dropped. This was retained heat, sheltered, insulated, suppressed. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as the log scrolled past. Between 7:43 and 7:47 p.m., the night before, there was a motion spike. Raina's silhouette disappeared, replaced by displacement activity. Shovel pattern, heat diffusion from multiple footprints. Then nothing. I snapped the window shut and returned to the cradle, this time with a handheld probe. No sirens, no digging. Just a low-sounding rod to map density beneath the surface. If there was a hollow cavity there, it would ring differently than undisturbed soil. At 4.5 feet deep, the tone changed. I pressed my palm flat against the dirt, still warm, still silent. Darla wasn't just cruel, she was precise, calculated. That's why she cited runoff violations and hydrological zones. It gave her just enough legal cover to start tearing through the yard without alerting local enforcement. She didn't need to hide Raina far. She needed her hidden, legally. Behind me, the wooden gate creaked. I turned slowly. Lenward Pike stood halfway through the opening, one hand resting on the gate, the other gripping a clipboard like it was armor. "You're not supposed to be doing private excavation," he said, voice brittle. "You're not supposed to approve fake easement permits," I replied. His jaw tightened. He didn't deny it. Lenward had been the HOA's grounds compliance officer for 8 years. Retired military. Did everything by the book until Darla handed him a new one. A quieter one. The kind you couldn't get in print but could lose your home for disobeying. "You're standing on her," I said softly. He didn't answer. He stepped forward, eyes locked on the disturbed soil where the lavender lay flattened. His boots crunched softly over the gravel lining. Then he stopped, maybe 3 feet from me. "I told her we weren't contractors," he murmured. "Told Darla this wasn't part of the groundskeeping plan." "You helped dig the trench?" "I marked it. The trench was already there." He shifted as if even breathing in the wrong rhythm might expose more than he meant. But I saw her push the fabric back. She had something in her hands. Looked like rope. I didn't flinch. "You should have stopped her." His grip on the clipboard whitened. "I know." He turned and walked out the same way he came in, never once looking over his shoulder. I didn't need his guilt. I needed his timestamps. I headed back into the garage and opened the case beneath the toolbox. My tactical drone, repurposed for overhead mapping, still held a full charge. Its FLIR unit wasn't high-res, but it was good enough to confirm depth, temperature, and airflow obstruction. If Raina was under there, and she was still breathing, I had maybe 2 hours. That was the first time I let the thought in, not if she was alive, but how long she could hold on. I launched the drone from the far end of the yard, near the arbor where Raina used to sit and talk to the baby when she thought I wasn't listening. The hum of the rotors cut through the silence like a warning. I angled the FLIR sensor low, steady, focused. As the bird rose, I watched the live feed flicker and stabilize. There it was, an oblong heat signature in the soil beneath the earth cradle. Roughly human-sized, roughly Raina-sized. The temperature gradient along the edges suggested recent burial. But what made my stomach drop wasn't the shape. It was the stillness. The kind of stillness that didn't come from unconsciousness. I was running out of time. The drone continued mapping as I pulled my phone and called Officer Bree Thalen again. No answer. Not surprising. Darla had looped her in early, said Raina was hysterical, that I was volatile, and that the garden was part of a zoning dispute. The department had washed their hands. The HOA's legal buffer was airtight. Unless I broke through. I turned toward the gate, hoping for one last out. Lenward Pike stood on the other side of the fence, just beyond the trellis. He looked like he hadn't moved in hours. Same clipboard, same tight jaw. But this time, he didn't hide the way his eyes followed the drone in slow arcs overhead. "You knew she was still here," I said. "Didn't you?" He didn't answer. "You saw the trench." He gave a small nod, like an admission he couldn't swallow. "She was pregnant, Len." His hand gripped the top of the fence. "I didn't know she was in it." I believed him. But belief didn't make him clean. "You marked the dig site?" He looked away. "She said it was a drainage plan, said the board approved it, showed me some permit with my initials already on it. Forged, I guess. I figured she was just laying pipe." "She was." His breath hitched. "You don't need to confess," I said. "I don't need words. I need proof. Something real. Something I can put in front of the people Darla answers to." His eyes flicked back toward me. "What people?" "The ones who investigate manipulated permits and HOA embezzlement," I said. "Federal Building Inspection Authority, state zoning auditors, maybe even internal affairs if Bree doesn't call me back." He stared at me for a long second, then slowly reached into his vest pocket. A cracked old smartphone emerged, its screen foggy but intact. He unlocked it with a fingerprint and tapped into his inspection app. "Every dig gets a geotag," he said quietly. "Standard procedure." He opened the archived records, scrolling to the date 3 days ago, the day Raina vanished. He held the screen out. There it was. A GPS ping placed inside our property line, within the exact dimensions of the Earth cradle. "Coordinates, timestamps, and photo logs," he murmured. "Didn't think I'd ever have to use them." I took a photo of his screen with my own phone. "You just did." I turned back toward the house, not bothering to say, "Thank you, we were well past that." Inside, I loaded the data into my secure drive and started building the evidence tree, the drone's heat signature snapshot, Lenward's geotagged inspection logs, video footage from the solar lanterns. I didn't need a full case yet, just enough to force local authorities to act without HOA filtration. While the drone hovered, I pulled up the HOA community calendar. There it was, a board meeting scheduled for tomorrow. Location, Maple Rook Community Clubhouse. Public attendance permitted. Audio recording allowed. Perfect. I glanced out the window. The drone held its position. The temperature hadn't changed. Still warm. Still still. My hands curled into fists. I knew how to interrogate liars, how to isolate language cues, how to take people like Darla Vexley apart in front of an audience without ever raising my voice. Tomorrow, she wouldn't be walking into a meeting. She'd be walking into evidence. The next morning, Darla Vexley knocked on my door like she owned the deed to my bones. I didn't open. She knocked again, more forcefully. "Mr. Corrin, you've been served 3 separate notices. The HOA board will proceed with forced compliance if this situation isn't remedied today." She slipped an envelope through the slot. I waited until I heard her heels click down the porch steps and the engine of her Lexus fade away before I picked it up. The seal was already broken. Inside was a formal easement violation and site removal order. Claimed the flowerbed Raina built sat on shared hydrological ground. Stamped with a fake city seal, 4 signatures, none real, including Lenward Pike's. Except this time, I had his geotag logs, the real ones. My hands didn't shake, not anymore. I walked out the back door and straight to the cradle. The drone had long since landed, its battery drained, but I didn't need it today. The earth was damp from morning mist, but still unnaturally warm where I had last tested. I didn't dig, not yet. The temperature was holding steady. That meant either she was insulated and alive, or she was insulated and not. But I wasn't going to guess. I spent the next hour organizing the packet. Evidence tree first. Photos, drone thermal stills, GPS logs from Lenward. I linked in screenshots of HOA permit records that contradicted Darla's forged orders. Every fake claim had a corresponding file proving it invalid. Every lie had a footprint. I slid it all into a weatherproof envelope, sealed it, and labeled it City Planning Emergency Zoning Violation Alert. Then I walked 3 blocks to Officer Bree Thallen's cruiser. She always parked in the same cul-de-sac when she wasn't on shift. Today was no different. She sat inside sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. I tapped the window. She flinched, then rolled it down. "Mr. Corrin, I told you this is a civil issue. You need to—" "I know what you said," I replied, and handed her the envelope. "But you'll want to look at page 5. The signature on the permit Darla used to approve the excavation, it belongs to a dead zoning official, died in 2019. His name's being used on active permits. Bree blinked. I waited. She opened the packet and flipped through the pages. Her eyes narrowed as she hit the timestamped GPS logs, the fake signature, the drone thermal snapshots. I didn't say a word. I just watched the color drain from her face. "You're telling me she dug into your property without consent?" she said. "She forged board approval, claimed Raina's garden obstructed water flow. Then Raina went missing. You filed the report." "You buried it," I said evenly. "Now I'm digging it back up." Bree didn't argue. She handed the envelope back, this time more gently. "I'll open an internal inquiry," she said. "But you know this'll get political. Darla's got ties to the city planning committee. Her sister-in-law's a contractor on the Glen Ridge expansion." I didn't care. "I'll see her at the board meeting tonight," I said. "You should come too. Wear something with a badge." I turned and walked back toward my house. She didn't stop me. That evening I made one final prep run. I printed 12 color copies of the drone footage, one for each HOA board member. I wanted them to see the heat signature with their own eyes, see that a body had been lying beneath the soil they signed off on. Raina still hadn't moved. That thought gnawed like acid against the inside of my ribs. Every time I blinked, I saw her hand curled in the soil, or her face pressed against cold earth. My gut told me she was alive, but I knew how bodies failed under stress. Oxygen loss, panic paralysis, shock. She was a fighter, but time had its own laws. When I stepped outside just before sunset, the entire neighborhood was glowing in the haze of porch lights and silent whispers. Word had spread. The HOA meeting was tonight, and the Quran house wasn't quiet anymore. The earth cradle was marked with a single orange flag Darla had staked earlier that morning, a grave marker and a challenge. The Maple Rook clubhouse smelled like pine-scented cleaner and old entitlement. Rows of cushioned folding chairs faced a long oak table where the HOA board sat with smug faces and stacked papers. The ceiling fans spun slow, lazy circles overhead, as if bored with the entire ordeal. Darla Vexley was already seated at the center of the panel, her lipstick perfectly outlined, a navy blouse with gold trim, like she was running for office instead of answering for what she'd done. The second she saw me enter, she smiled, like this was just another performance. I walked past the chairs and set 12 manila envelopes on the board's table, one in front of each member. They watched me with cautious curiosity, unsure whether to scoff or sit up straighter. Darla didn't touch hers. "Mr. Corin, this is a scheduled board meeting, not an open forum. Unless you're here to discuss landscaping penalties, I'll have to ask you to—" "You'll want to read page 2, I said. "That's where the thermal scan starts." A few of the members glanced down. One opened the folder, then another. The room quieted, all casual posture evaporating as they stared at the color printouts, bright blobs of red, orange, and human-shaped heat under 6 inches of soil. "Is this—" murmured one of them. Darla laughed, a short, sharp sound. "This is harassment. Fabricated data from a man spiraling into grief." "She's alive," I said. "The heat signature hasn't changed. The temperature's too stable, too insulated. That trench you authorized? It was never for a rain garden." Her mouth twitched, just once. She recovered quickly. "I have the proper permits," she said. "The board approved a standard water runoff correction project. His wife obstructed a city-designated area." "There is no city approval," I replied. "And the signature on the permit? Roger Neely, zoning official who died 4 years ago. Funny how his signature showed up on a document dated last Tuesday." I could see the hesitation in their eyes now. The HOA secretary shifted in his seat. Someone down the line murmured to the treasurer, voice tight. Lenward Pike entered quietly through the side door. No clipboard, no vest. Just an old windbreaker and something older behind his eyes. He stood at the back, saying nothing. But when my eyes met his, he nodded once. I turned back to the board. "You've all been complicit in one way or another. Whether you knew what she was doing or just signed your names without reading, you let her weaponize your authority." "This is outrageous," Darla snapped. "I demand this be stricken from the record." "It's already in the city system," I said calmly. "I submitted it to Officer Bree Thalen this morning. She's contacting the Department of Zoning Enforcement and the Regional FBI Evidence Response Team. They're rerouting a mobile unit, should be here within the hour. A silence settled in the room. I turned toward the crowd behind me. Residents, neighbors, silent faces pressed close together. Some of them had probably received Darla's citations too. Maybe they'd had bushes removed, sheds flagged, patios torn down over non-compliant materials. They looked at me now like something had just cracked open. "I'm not asking for an apology," I said. "I'm asking for a shovel." Darla stood abruptly, pushing back from the table. "You don't get to come into this community and threaten its structure," she hissed. "Your wife was unstable. She attacked board members, refused to attend meetings. She was 8 months pregnant and tending a flower bed," I said. "You stalked her, you isolated her, and when she stood up to you, you made her disappear." The door opened at the far end of the room. Officer Bree stepped inside, radio at her hip, eyes scanning the board table. She said nothing as she moved to the front, took one of the folders, and flipped through it slowly. Then she looked at Darla. "I'm going to need you to stay after this meeting," she said. "There are inconsistencies in your paperwork that need immediate clarification." Darla's face didn't move. She just sat, rigid, silent. But I saw her knuckles go white, and I knew. This wasn't a meeting anymore. It was an excavation. I didn't wait for the board to adjourn. The moment Bree confirmed jurisdiction, I was already out the door, cutting across the manicured grass of Maple Rook Glen toward my yard. My breath hitched in short, even bursts. I hadn't run in years, not since Quantico. My knees remembered every step, but I didn't care. The earth cradle was waiting. The soil shimmered slightly under the moonlight. It had rained lightly while I was inside the clubhouse. Now the ground was darker, slick, almost soft enough to whisper when I stepped on it. I dropped to my knees and pressed my hand flat against the earth. Still warm, still there. Officer Bree followed moments later, along with Lenward Pike and 2 patrol officers I didn't recognize. They had shovels, gloves, emergency gear slung in duffels. Bree looked different now, jaw tight, eyes hollow. Maybe this was the first time she'd seen past the badge Darla wore like armor. "You sure about the location?" she asked. I nodded. 4.5 feet, I said. "My FLIR caught the edge of the heat bloom here. It hasn't moved in over a day." She gestured to the officers, and they began to dig, not fast, not recklessly. They worked like surgeons. Every inch of soil moved with care. Lenward didn't dig, but he stood behind them like a man chained to what he'd done, or hadn't done. I watched every spadeful like it might breathe. The first sign came at 36 inches. Fabric. Landscape liner pulled back too carefully. Not torn, not crumpled. Someone had laid it down with the intention of covering a hole without compressing what was inside. At 41 inches, one of the officers froze. "I've got plastic," he said. They cleared more. Then another voice, lower. Breathing tube, a white PVC pipe, barely wide enough for airflow, tucked into the far edge of the trench. Not connected to anything, just angled toward the cradle's core. My throat clenched. She hadn't just been buried. She'd been entombed, hidden, silenced, and given just enough air to let her die slowly. That was the real horror. Darla hadn't wanted Raina gone. She wanted her unreachable. "Here!" one of the officers yelled, his gloved hand brushing dirt from a fabric-covered arm. They cleared the last foot in silence. Then I saw her, curled on her side, cradling her stomach, her face covered in streaks of soil and dried tears. Her lips were cracked. Her breathing was shallow, almost too faint to detect, but her chest moved. She was alive. I dropped beside the pit before anyone could stop me. My knees hit the dirt. My arms went around her, trembling with something bigger than relief. Her skin was cold and damp, but when I touched her shoulder, her eyes fluttered open. Barely. Her voice cracked out of her like wind through reeds. I stayed still. "I know," I whispered. "You held on." She tried to move, but I held her steady until the EMTs arrived. Bree called in the ambulance before the second breath. Lenward stepped back into the shadows, as if he couldn't bear the sight of her. Maybe he couldn't bear himself. The paramedics lifted Raina out with practiced hands, wrapping her in silver insulation and oxygen. She didn't resist, just closed her eyes again as they wheeled her toward the street. I followed behind, mud coating my hands, my shirt, my soul, but I didn't care. Raina was breathing. I looked back one last time. Darla was standing at the edge of the yard now, her arms crossed, HOA badge still around her neck. She hadn't spoken, not once, but her eyes followed every movement. When she saw me watching her, she turned and walked away, slowly, deliberately, as if she still believed none of it would stick, as if burying a woman alive under city-sanctioned landscaping would vanish like mulch under rain. But this wasn't going away. I'd seen it, Bree had seen it, and the neighborhood had felt it. The earth cradle had been a place of peace. Now it was evidence. I didn't sleep that night. Raina was stable at the hospital, but sedated. Her oxygen levels were low. Her heartbeat was weak. The baby's was stronger. They said she'd lasted longer than anyone should have. I already knew why. She stayed still. Raina never panicked under pressure. That was her strength, not mine. When her body failed her during the first miscarriage, she didn't scream. She just stared at the ceiling and whispered lullabies to a baby we never got to meet. I watched her then, helpless. Now she'd survived being buried alive because she knew that panic would waste breath. That knowledge burned through every inch of me as I stared at the photos again. FLIR heat maps, GPS logs, Darla's forged permit. It wasn't enough to dig Raina out, not to me. It had to stick. It had to end Darla's reign. For Raina. For everyone else who bent their neck because she told them to. And I knew the next step wasn't legal. It was personal. The HOA board had already gone dark. Their website was under maintenance. The neighborhood Facebook group had all its posts locked. No one wanted to say anything. Fear clamped over the street like a noose. Darla was still walking free, still attending to board matters, still pretending nothing happened. But Lenward Pike showed up at my door the next morning. He didn't knock. He just stood there, hand in his jacket pocket, face pale and distant. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. He didn't ask. "She made me sign it," he said, holding out a thumb drive. "What is it?" "My inspection logs. All of them. Audio notes, too. I started recording every interaction with her last year after she accused me of falsifying plant height reports." I took it. "She forged anything else?" He nodded. "At least 4. Permits. Some were to remove trees that had been there since the subdivision broke ground. Others, I think she just wanted leverage, something to hold over homeowners who talked back." "And you let her." "I'm not proud," he muttered. I stepped out onto the porch with him. "Why now?" "Because she buried someone and thought I'd be too old or too scared to speak." "You still are?" I said. He winced. "I should have stopped her at the trench," he said, voice cracking. "But when I saw your wife's shoes sitting by the back steps, I knew." Lenward reached into his jacket again and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a photo, Darla standing near the trench with a city document folded in one hand. The corner of Raina's sun hat could be seen lying beside her, half buried in dirt. "She thought no one would check," he said. "She thinks inspection logs are just formality. But mine auto back up to the HOA archive, just needed admin access to download." "Won't she wipe them?" "I already copied the server. I'm not stupid, just slow." I nodded, the corner of my mouth twitching in something that wasn't quite forgiveness. He looked at me for a long time. "I'll testify. You'll need someone to explain the logs, the zoning jargon, the timestamps. I'll make sure it holds." "Why?" "Because if I don't, I'll end up the next name on one of her fake permits." He walked away without another word. Inside, I plugged in the drive. The files were clean, organized, time-stamped, labeled by address, every permit she issued, every note he took. And sure enough, buried between 2 inspection folders, was a full audio recording labeled Drainage Conflict, RK Property. I clicked play. Darla's voice came through, icy and measured. "I don't care what you think you saw. You'll mark the trench, you'll sign off on the runoff corridor, and you'll forget what that woman was planting. Do it, or I'll make sure the board finds another veteran to hand out violations." Silence. Then Lenward's tired voice. "You'll kill her." A pause. Then Darla. "Then she shouldn't have pushed." I paused the file, my hands resting against the edge of the desk. I didn't need more. This wasn't just negligence. This was a confession. By mid-afternoon, I was back in contact with Dr. Ren Rivas. We'd worked dozens of cases together back in the bureau. Ren was our forensic linguistics and audio analysis guy. The kind of man who could detect a lie in a breath and build timelines from silence. He owed me a favor. I only needed one. I sent him the audio clip, the FLIR scans, and Lenward's inspection log structure. 20 minutes later, he called me on an encrypted line. "Silas," he said, "what am I looking at? Premeditation, coercion, burying a pregnant woman alive, and using legal paperwork to smother the trail." "Jesus," he muttered. "This isn't just HOA abuse. This is layered obstruction with community compliance. That's why I need your help." He paused. I heard keyboard clacks. "You recorded her without consent?" "I didn't. Lenward did. It's legal under single-party consent laws in this state, and he's prepared to testify." "Good, because this recording doesn't just sound like coercion. It is coercion. Her wording in the final phrase, "then she shouldn't have pushed." That's self-justification. Linguistically, she's admitting she caused harm and rationalized it after the fact. Can you authenticate it? I already ran it through noise profiling. The background signatures match 2 different locations: open yard and enclosed shed. She didn't know she was being recorded. The cadence is natural, no signs of editing. I'll clean it up and render the timeline overlay for a formal analysis. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like days. How fast? I'll have a forensic report by tonight. Get me the HOA's bylaws and your property plat. If she forged access documents, I want to know which parts contradict city code. I'll forward everything, I said. Thank you, Ren. Don't thank me yet. This won't stop at her. He was right. Darla had power because she was insulated. The board, the planning committee, the city contacts. They kept her untouchable by drowning people in process. But this wasn't a process now. It was a timeline. I sent him the rest of the files and pulled up the HOA email server next. The resident login gave me nothing, but Lenward had slipped me his access credentials before he left. Old school guy. He'd written them on the back of his electric bill. Once I was in, I filtered messages between Darla and the board by subject line: easement, excavation, landscaping compliance. It wasn't long before I found them, threads where Darla detailed the fake runoff project, citing immediate board approval and forwarding PDFs of the forged permits. One message caught my eye. It was sent 2 days before Raina disappeared. Subject: RK property removal strategy. Darla had attached a draft press release. In it, she wrote, "The resident at 144 Windmere has voluntarily vacated her garden privileges due to repeated violations. A restorative rain garden will be implemented by HOA volunteers to promote hydrological health." Voluntarily vacated. She had this statement written before Raina was even missing, before any board meeting, before anything happened publicly. This was pre-written, planned. She had intended for Raina to disappear quietly with the HOA's blessing and be replaced with flowers and fake virtue. I downloaded the email thread and added it to the packet. I tagged the metadata. I geotagged the timestamps. Everything was shaping into a structure no defense attorney would be able to disassemble. Darla hadn't just buried my wife. She'd written the script. She had tried to turn an attempted murder into a landscaping update. Ren sent back the preliminary audio report 30 minutes later. It was clean, clear, and labeled with a breakdown of each manipulative phrase, threat, and coercive clause. One section in bold red: "Then she shouldn't have pushed." Conclusive admission of retaliatory action in response to perceived resistance. Establishes causal link between victim's refusal and speaker's intent. That was the moment it shifted. We weren't preparing a complaint anymore. We were preparing an arrest. I spent the rest of the day preparing for war. It wasn't enough to have the evidence. Not with someone like Darla. She had a decade's worth of political handshakes and legal favors stuffed into that clipboard of hers. If I wanted to bring her down, it had to be public. It had to be surgical. And most importantly, it had to leave no room for recovery. By sunset, I had everything loaded onto a portable hard drive, audio file with forensic authentication, Ren's full timeline analysis, drone footage, Lenward's inspection log backups, screenshots of the HOA email threads, and a copy of Darla's fake press release, time-stamped 2 days before Raina vanished. All of it cross-labeled and version-stamped, synced to my encrypted cloud vault. Then I made 3 duplicate drives. One went to Officer Bree. One went to a journalist I used to work with, Marissa Tang, local investigations reporter for WPKA 7. The third I dropped at City Zoning's complaint box in an envelope labeled Immediate Legal Review, Unlawful Excavation, and Endangerment. That wasn't the end of it. I printed 15 color photo boards, mounted versions of the thermal scan stills, side-by-sides of the permit signature, and the deceased official's original, Lenward's GPS data layered over Darla's claim maps, and most importantly, a transcript of her own voice admitting motive. All of it designed to do one thing: corner her in front of the very people she used to shield herself. The HOA's next meeting had been canceled, publicly due to internal security concerns. But word had already spread. Residents were whispering across hedges and through porch fences. I caught fragments during my walk earlier. "Did you hear? They say she buried her. Board says it's a misunderstanding." No one said her name, but everyone knew it. When the crowd started gathering outside the Maple Rook clubhouse that evening, I was already there. I didn't dress like a government official, didn't wear a badge, just jeans, boots, and a black shirt that still smelled like dirt from my backyard. Bree pulled up in her cruiser at exactly 6:47. She gave me a curt nod and stepped out with a clipboard and a GoPro strapped to her vest. "This is for legal protection," she said, tapping the camera. "Department protocol." "Good," I said. "We'll need the footage." Darla arrived 5 minutes later, still polished, still postured, still pretending this was some minor optics fire she could smother with bureaucracy and the scent of peppermint hand lotion. But something had shifted in her. She scanned the crowd slower than usual. She walked stiffer. She knew. I stepped forward before she could speak. "I've submitted the forensic audio to the Zoning Commission and filed a formal charge of criminal endangerment with local law enforcement. My wife is still recovering, but she's breathing. And so is our baby, which means this isn't an obituary hearing." Darla didn't blink. "This is a liability hearing." The crowd hushed. I turned toward the homeowners gathered behind me. "You've all received fines, notices, warnings. You've all repainted shutters twice in a year. Been told your mailboxes were an inch too high, that your trash bins didn't have aesthetically uniform lids. But none of you thought she'd go this far." A few looked down. Others stared at Darla with new eyes. Bree stepped forward now, clipboard in hand. "Effective immediately," she said. "A temporary injunction is being placed on the Maple Rook Glen HOA Board's authority to conduct enforcement actions until the ongoing criminal investigation concludes. All active citations are frozen. No fines may be issued." Murmurs broke across the crowd. Darla finally spoke. "You can't do this. This is a private community. These are internal matters. You're overstepping." Bree didn't flinch. "No, Mrs. Vexley. You overstepped. When you forged access permits, when you falsified board approval, and when you ordered trench work over a resident's garden hours before she went missing." Darla opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Bree turned to me. "Are you ready?" I nodded, and together we walked toward the podium, not for permission, for exposure. The podium wasn't meant for trials, but that night, it held more truth than any courtroom I'd ever stood in. Bree angled her body so her vest cam caught everything: the crowd, the board table, and Darla Vexley, still seated at the center like a queen clinging to a crown made of paperwork and fear. I placed the first photo board against the easel, FLIR scan, dated, time-stamped, color-mapped. The crowd leaned in. Some gasped quietly. I didn't speak yet. I let the image settle, let it become real. Then I flipped it. A screenshot of the permit Darla submitted for the excavation. Below it, a DMV-recorded signature from Roger Neely, the zoning official who died in 2019. "This is the permit used to authorize the trench work in my backyard," I said, voice steady. "It was submitted 4 days ago. The person who supposedly signed it has been dead for 6 years." No one interrupted. I pointed at the next board, Lenward's GPS-logged inspection report. "This is the exact location of the trench, the marker placed by the HOA's own inspector, Lenward Pike. These logs are pulled directly from the HOA's internal inspection app and time synced to the same day Raina disappeared." People started whispering again. Darla's face was pale now, tight but unmoving, like a porcelain doll refusing to crack until the hammer touched it. I turned to the last display. A printed transcript, highlighted text in red. At the top, "Then she shouldn't have pushed." Darla Vexley, HOA president. This is a direct quote from a recorded conversation between Darla and the same inspector, I said. The forensic audio expert, Dr. Ren Rivas, has authenticated the recording. Her voice, no manipulation, no cuts. In that moment, she justified burying my wife under a fabricated legal pretense. Someone near the front stepped back from their chair. Bree walked forward now, holding up a small recorder. For the record, she said, Officer Bree Thalen of City Enforcement is opening a criminal negligence and attempted murder investigation into Darla Vexley based on this evidence. Charges pending. Still, Darla didn't move, but her fingers clenched the edge of the board table so hard the wood creaked. A hand went up from the crowd. It was Jordan Markell, former treasurer of the HOA, someone I hadn't seen in weeks. His voice came out brittle. She threatened to fine my wife for hanging wind chimes, he said they violated auditory code. We paid the fee because we were scared. What if we hadn't? That was the rupture. Dozens of murmurs turned into full stories. People stepping forward, complaints, threats, retaliation over patio cushions, garden flags, a family who installed a disability ramp and got a permanent modification violation. Everyone had a scar. Darla stood. Her voice didn't shake, but her legs did. This is character assassination. You're letting personal grief distort community truth, Bree cut in. You falsified government documents. I was maintaining standards. You forged zoning authority. I protected this neighborhood from chaos. Bree stepped closer. You buried a woman alive. That hit like a bell toll. Even Darla blinked. Then she tried to walk away. Bree blocked her path. I'm detaining you for questioning under City Code 42.7, misuse of authority leading to physical harm. Bree turned her wrist, clipped a pair of plastic cuffs from her belt, and with silent efficiency, locked Darla's hands behind her back. The crowd didn't cheer, they didn't shout, they just watched, silent. Like the spell had finally broken. As Darla was escorted to the waiting cruiser, I looked toward the tree line. Lenward stood alone, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes unreadable. He gave me a single nod. I nodded back. Inside my chest, something released. Not rage, not even relief. Just space. Space to breathe. The cruiser pulled away without sirens. Just the hum of tires against pavement and the final image of Darla Vexley staring straight ahead, hands cuffed, HOA, badge still clipped to her collar like it meant something. I stood there long after the car disappeared. The crowd didn't leave right away. They lingered near the clubhouse, quiet at first, then slowly coming alive. Groups breaking into whispered huddles, neighbors trading war stories like survivors of a silent occupation. No one looked at me with pity. Not anymore. It was something else now, something closer to respect. I didn't need it. I just needed Raina. The walk back to the house was heavier than I expected. Not because of exhaustion, though my body ached from the stress, but because of what was waiting. The earth cradle was no longer a symbol. It was a wound. A scar in the dirt, outlined with orange flagging tape and forensic spray. Bree had left it open. In case city investigators need to redocument it, she'd said. I didn't care what the city needed. I cared what Raina would see when she came home. I picked up the shovel. It took me over an hour. I filled the trench slowly, packing the soil layer by layer, gently, the way she used to tuck blankets around her stomach when the baby kicked. I laid the lavender cuttings back across the top, not in the same neat rows, but in a circle, like arms enclosing something sacred. I left the PVC pipe off to the side, a reminder, a marker, not of where she had been, but of what someone like Darla was willing to do. When I stepped inside, the house felt warmer. Maybe it was the adrenaline finally crashing out of my system. Maybe it was the message on my phone. Raina, awake, asking for you, stable. I was out the door in seconds. The hospital was 10 minutes away, but I took every turn like it mattered. I parked crooked, didn't wait for security clearance. The nurse at the front desk saw my face and waved me through without a word. Room 217. I paused at the door. My hand hesitated on the handle. Not because I was scared, but because I didn't know what I'd find. Not physically. I'd seen the monitors. I knew her vitals. But I didn't know her. Not after this. Not after what she'd endured underground, alone, with a baby inside her and a monster standing over her garden with a clipboard. I opened the door. She looked up immediately, pale, lips dry, eyes rimmed red but alive, so very achingly alive. "Hey," she said, voice like gravel smoothed by love. I crossed the room in 3 steps. She tried to sit up. I stopped her with a hand on her shoulder. "You stayed still," I whispered. "You always said I was stubborn." I laughed, and it broke something in my chest. The doctor came in shortly after, said her oxygen levels were holding. Baby's heartbeat was strong, no brain trauma, no signs of early labor. "You got to her in time," he said. "Whoever buried her gave just enough airflow to prevent collapse. It was the restraint that saved her." But I knew the truth. It wasn't restraint. It was will. Raina was made of something Darla Vexley would never understand. Something stronger than bylaws, deeper than roots, something that bloomed even in darkness. We stayed in that room through the night. She told me everything in fragments, what she remembered, the way Darla approached her in the yard, the false concern, the threat, the shove, the fall into the trench. The liner rolled over her like a funeral sheet. "She thought I'd scream," Raina said. "I didn't." "She thought I'd panic," I said. "I didn't either." We sat in silence for a long time, hands clasped across her belly. And when morning broke through the blinds, I told her what came next. 3 weeks later, the earth cradle bloomed again. Raina planted it herself, slowly, methodically. Knees on a soft foam mat, gloved hands brushing the dirt like she was laying down something sacred. The lavender took first. Then came the lamb's ear, and finally a ring of baby's breath around the edge. She'd wanted the symbolism to stay intact. Breath, memory, protection. Life growing in the exact place it had almost ended. The neighborhood was different now. Gone were the HOA patrols with clipboards. Gone were the citation stickers and anonymous warnings slipped under doormats. The board had been disbanded by a vote held 2 days after Darla's arrest. Over 60 residents showed up. Lenward Pike stood up at the front and resigned publicly, even though no one asked him to. He handed his entire inspection archive to the city attorney's office and said he was done being the scared old man who knew better. They replaced the HOA with a temporary advisory committee, while an outside firm audited everything Darla had ever signed. I didn't join it. My work was done. Raina sat beside me on the swing as the sun dipped low, one hand resting over her belly. The doctor said everything looked strong. The baby had survived the stress, the oxygen deprivation, the trauma. "You must have passed that stubborn streak into them," the OB had joked. Raina just smiled and said, "No, it's the soil." And maybe she was right. Maybe there's something about the land we choose to defend, something that remembers the ones who bled, who fought, who stayed still just long enough to be found. Bree came by that evening to drop off paperwork. Darla was being held without bond. The charges had multiplied: attempted murder, abuse of authority, obstruction, falsifying government documents, coercion under color of law. The DA was building a public case. No plea deals, no buried hearings. "She picked the wrong family," Bree said, handing me the folder. "But more than that, she picked the wrong garden. Most people wouldn't have had the evidence, or the backup." I nodded. "Most people don't wire their flower beds to a thermal relay." Bree smirked. "And most HOA presidents don't sound like mob bosses on tape." She turned to leave, then stopped. "You gonna testify?" "I already did," I said. "Now it's just paperwork and memory." After she left, Raina rested her head on my shoulder. "You think it'll last?" she asked. "The peace?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But if it doesn't, I'm not going anywhere. And neither are the censors." She laughed quietly, and the sound broke something in the air, something tight and old that had been holding the neighborhood hostage for too long. The next morning, I went to the community center with a folded piece of paper and a photo of the garden. I pinned it to the new bulletin board, just above a sign that read, "Resident Updates Welcome." The note said, "The earth cradle was never meant to be a symbol. It was just where we put things we couldn't carry anymore. Grief, hope, names we hadn't chosen yet. But if you need a place to breathe, it's open again. No citations, no rules, just soil." The next day, someone planted a sunflower near the back edge. The day after that, there were 3, and a bench, and a nameplate. Raina's Cradle, for what was nearly lost and what still lives. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, Share your story in the comments and let me know where you're watching from.